Well, although someone who can be that sophisticated to log in to disable devices, unless you have a lot of really valuable stuff at home, the same person who can do this kind of stuff would not go for a physical burglary. I mean, it's like that's just asking for trouble.
You gotta have like some kind of a relic, kryptonite, or lithium crystals or something.
A lithium crystal, yeah, that would definitely do it. I got to put my warp engine back together, right? Yes. Okay, so are we okay so far? I mean, you guys getting the basic ideas of networking with TCP/IP? And you guys are seeing the value of putting stuff on the network at home? I think the book talks about that a little bit, but not nearly to the extent that I am talking about right now. Okay, here comes the next question. Okay, so your rice cooker is networked, your oven is networked, your toaster is networked, your vacuum cleaner is networked, your thermostat is networked, and so on and so forth. It will cost a lot of money if each one of those devices has a 7-inch touchscreen, to interface to whatever you need to configure, wouldn't it? So what do? I mean, how do I make my toaster just as cheap as today, but with the networking technology? Because without a panel, a nice LCD display panel, how am I going to configure my toast? When am I supposed to turn it on and stuff?
Like what you were saying with the web browser for the cameras or for the thermostat.
Mm-hmm. But that means I have to run back to my home office in order to specify the darkness of my toast. I mean, go ahead.
Get like kind of like a universal remote, but like a pad.
Exactly. That's exactly why I brought it up at the beginning of the class. Remember that $35 e-pad thing that I showed you guys a little earlier? That's Wi-Fi capable. It is small. And even if it is not $35, but maybe $100, you only need like 2 or 3 of these things at home because it is attached to the network. So now, if you have one in the kitchen, the same device can now be used to control your oven, your juicer, your toaster, and so on and so forth. And it is completely portable. From the kitchen, you can also configure your thermostat. You can take a peek outside and say, okay, is someone parking on my driveway? Who's that person? The same device can do all that because all your appliances are networked. Okay, you just need to have inexpensive, quote unquote terminals to access each and every device, and that technology is already here. Some of the new HP printers come with its own tablet, so that you can preview what you're printing and specify the parameters. I'm not sure what is the price of those printers, but I don't think they're like the super high-end office computers. I think they're more intended for home use. So we are already looking into the future of these tablets being one, inexpensive, and 2, being able to control just about anything that has a web type interface. Are we okay so far? Okay. So now getting back to the boring stuff. Well, the boring stuff is necessary if you want to be able to configure your network. I mean, it's exciting and fun to have everything attached to the network, but in order to actually do it, you have to understand the basic terms and terminologies of everything like that. Okay, so now we have the basic idea of what a subnet is. What happens when you have 2 subnets and a computer from one subnet wants to talk to a computer on another subnet? Okay, so let me just describe the problem here. What if a computer of a subnet wants to talk to another computer in another subnet? In other words, we have 2 subnets here. Okay, let's say one subnet is your house. Okay, your house is one subnet, and another subnet would be, say, your neighbor's subnet. Okay, your neighbor has his own network, so normally these function as 2 entirely different networks. But let's say your neighbor is on vacation, and he wants you to be able to keep an eye on stuff, and maybe call you to Well, he could have done that, if he had, the technology, to remotely log in. So let's say your neighbor is going to a place where he does not have internet access, but can still call you occasionally. Okay. So how do you access, computers of another subnet? Go ahead.
Some kind of gateway.
You can access it by the gateway. Okay. Go ahead.
Remote.
But how? Because your subnet, you can only talk to computers of your own subnet. And if you try to access things outside of your subnet, you have to go to your gateway. So now the question is, are the two gateways able to talk to each other so that they can figure out and say, oh, I want to get out and go to the other subnet. How do I get to the other subnet? The other device has to say, oh, I'm here. Yep.
I was just going to say use your gateway to remotely log into the other gateway.
Not quite. Okay, because a lot of times if you're using a private subnet address like 192.168 dot something something, that's what we consider a private subnet address. And with a private subnet address, you cannot really go outside, and still have your IP address visible to the outside.
The neighbor has to set up a static IP address for your gateway to access theirs.
Yep. So you need to do some additional work, compared to what we have talked about so far. So that would definitely be one of the networking class topics. Anyone who's interested in more of the networking concepts, you really should take a CISN class. I think CISN 310, 300.
300 is the first one.
300 is the first one. Now, when you consider taking networking classes, there are two approaches. Let me show you the schedule or the catalog. Let me see what we can access here. So we go to courses, which will only bring up a web page. Sorry?
So I think Demise does 300 here.
Okay. But I want to show you some of the other options. If you're intrigued by networking, and I think there are futures, in occupations related to networking, especially when you're talking about helping homeowners to set up networks, because the devices are getting cheaper, but the technology is not getting any easier. I mean, you can kind of do some of those things automatically, but once you throw encryption into Wi-Fi and security into the computer networking and whatnot, it is not really something that an average homeowner can do. So if you think about it from that perspective, the Geek Squad from Best Buy, they got the concept right. They got the right idea. Okay, basically they have people driving those nice looking Beetles. Are they still driving Beetles these days?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I was tempted to get a white top of on my black Miata, so I would look like a Geek Squad person too. Except I'll be more of a has a more ghetto style to it. A ghetto geek, GG, that would be a kind of... What?
A little off there.
Okay. Ghetto Tech. Okay. Ghetto Tech. Yeah, that would be an interesting company name.
Even better, Ghetto Tech.
Ghetto Tech.
Oh, there you go.
With an A instead of a D.
Yep. Okay, so here we have, let's look up some networking classes here. I do want to point out, because the networking classes have different concentrations. So depending on what you want to accomplish, there are different concentrations that you can consider. So this is the beginning of some of the networking classes. So they have what they call a Cisco concentration. Can anyone tell me, how's the job outlook with Cisco technicians? Is it still as good as before, or is it kind of like, we don't know what?
It's actually about as good as before right now.
It's about as good, so it's not bad.
No.
Okay.
My brother works for Cisco.
Okay. So Cisco is still expanding. They're still looking for more people in the field. Okay. So that there you go. So this is good because what you can do is to get started with the Cisco type classes. Now, if you look at CISN 140 to 143, this is one series of classes. Each one is 3 units. They talk about both general concepts like TCP/IP, wiring, and all the other stuff that you need to know about networking, but they also teach Cisco-specific topics. In other words, the first class, CISN 140, is very generic. Okay, they talk about wiring, they talk about networking terms, they talk about subnets, they talk about the net mask and stuff like that, and they cover a lot of topics in the first class. But they're generic enough that it's really just networking stuff, with very little Cisco-specific stuff. But the subsequent classes, 141 all the way up to 143, will contain an increasing amount of Cisco-specific stuff. In other words, how do you configure the latest and greatest Cisco router? Okay, which is not going to be helpful to a homeowner, but if you want to be employed as a network technician, having a Cisco certification will be helpful. And these classes will help you get your CCNA certification, and possibly something a little better than that. There's no guarantee, but they will teach all the material related to a CCNA exam. Okay? So this means that you can learn about networking and also learn something that is specific to Cisco at the same time. So if your idea is to get to become a Cisco technician, this is not a bad way to go. They also have a Linux concentration, and the Linux concentration focuses more on the server side, not the router part of it, but it focuses more on how do you configure a Linux server so that you can do all these cool stuff that a server can do, like file serving, database serving, web serving, security settings. Okay. How to use Kerberos to make sure that your computer network is fully secured and you cannot crack into another server easily, that sort of thing. And I think they have a Windows concentration as well, which talks about mostly Windows surfaces. So anyone who's kind of interested in networking because of all the cool stuff that you can do with networking, these classes are not bad classes to take. They can be quite useful.
And they're fairly easy.
They're fairly easy if you don't mind reading a lot of stuff, because networking has a lot of details to it. So you
all the Windows.
You took all the Windows classes?
I'm on 307.
Okay. Active Directory is a very big thing too. If you want to set up any corporate network, understanding Windows Active Directory is going to be almost an essential and necessary step in order to become a corporate networking technician, especially in a Windows shop, a Microsoft shop. So I just want to show you some of the possibilities in terms of what classes you can take if you're interested in networking. So do we have any questions at this point? No questions? We have just covered many of the topics in the textbook from chapter 5 to chapter 6. Okay, I skipped over some of the other ones, some of the topics I did not talk about in the class, but you really should read, the chapters. It's fairly easy reading for the most part. If there's one term, in one of these things that the book did not explain, to your satisfaction, use Google, use Wikipedia. For the most part, Wikipedia will point you to the right article, and you can learn more about that. So we are moving on to chapter 7. Chapter 7, they start off talking about how do you put a web page onto the network. Okay, how many of you have your own websites or have your own web page somewhere on the internet? Not counting your CISW classes. Okay, so why do you do that? I mean, let's not talk about the technical or the boring stuff first. Let's talk about why do you want to be on the internet? Why do you want to own your own websites and web pages?
To find other people or to get in contact with other people that you may know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you can use Facebook now.
Yeah.
But Facebook also has a replacement. There's an open source replacement. We can talk about that when we have time. Yeah.
To share your knowledge and maybe show